Joe Rogan is without question one of the most famous men on the planet. Many of his fans either know him for his comedy or his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience.
So, we'll have to go to a different topic.
What? How did we get on this? We were,
You asked about the evolutionary basis of in-group.
That was a long time ago.
I know, it's a rabbit hole that just doesn't disappear.
But where were we just now?
But for us, he's always going to be the iconic voice of the UFC broadcast team, with him being the longest serving member of the current panel.
I did that video and I was in bed for a week. That was 30 seconds and I was in bed for a week. And it's not funny because it made me realize that you was
There
out.
it is right there.
Yeah.
For this video, we're going to be taking a look at some pretty crazy moments that Rogan probably wishes had never seen the light of day. These are 10 deleted moments Joe Rogan doesn't want fans to see. Dueling issue. If there are 3 names that you can all but guarantee to see at major UFC pay-per-view in the US, they are the company president Dana White, the voice of the Octagon Bruce Buffer, and the veteran commentator that is Joe Rogan. Joe then revealed that he'd be unable to commentate at the UFC event because of a scheduling conflict. A strange coincidence. Well, at that time, we may have thought so. You want to talk about throwing the man under the bus? Come on, Uncle Dana.
There's no conflict of schedule. Joe Rogan didn't work tonight. Joe Rogan could have worked tonight. Rogan.
Did he elect not to?
Yeah, Joe Rogan had, I don't know what Joe Rogan had to do. You guys will have to ask Joe Rogan, but, there was no Joe couldn't work or anything like that.
A what? Sometimes Joe's penchant for colorful language gets him in trouble, and even more often he tends to get his role as a podcast host and live fight commentator mixed up, as he often spends more time joking around on the broadcast than he does focusing on the action in the cage.
As a commentator and an employee of the UFC, doing right by the fighter is key, both in terms of helping each competitor's own personal brand, but it also ensures that the sport doesn't look bad. Sure, Joe is definitely improving in this regard, after a few rocky moments with big-named athletes that forced his hand. But over the years, some of the most awkward moments inside the cage have come from poorly advised post-fight interviews. Chief among these was his infamous interview with Gray Maynard after he had just knocked himself out with a slam on his opponent, Joe Emerson. The visible, dazed Maynard refused to acknowledge that he went out, something that ruled the fight as a draw. Rogan, being Rogan, tried to dominate the narrative by one-upping the still confused Maynard on live television.
Look at the replay, bro. Bro, look at the replay. You picked him up, watch the dump, bang. You hit your head down, now watch this. You're out. Watch this.
He's done right here.
He is done, but so are you. You're unconscious. Look at you roll over. You're completely unconscious.
Seriously, this was just a nasty way to have your night spoiled. Indeed, the draw wasn't ideal, but getting owned by a commentator who should have just let you say your piece made the whole experience that bit more unfortunate.
However, for our money, this slip-up was just about as hilarious as a moment as he's ever had on the mic. After a fighter had suffered a pretty hideous cut mid-fight, Rogan, being the poet that he is, decided to compare it to the most random thing possible. Seriously, we could take 1,000 attempts at describing that cut and never end up where Joe did. An instantly iconic commentary line, and one that will have its place in Rogan compilations for years to come. We'll just leave it at that. Joe, you are truly one of a kind.
That is nasty. Whoa.
You're fine.
Marvin Eastman, Vitor Belfort, no, I know. You'll never give me that. You'll never give me that one.
That Marvin Eastman one was.
I try it every show. Goat's vagina. That thing was huge. You said that, not me.
There's one key criticism that has followed Joe Rogan's commentary over the years. It's his ever-present tendency to completely ignore what's happening in the cage and fall into his own narrative, losing control of what he's telling the audience at home. And though fighters rarely call him out on it, the fans of the former lightweight champ Khabib Nurmagomedov took issue with his calling of the Eagles' lightweight title-winning performance against Al Iaquinta. A fight that was largely one-sided, Khabib won the bout on all 5 scorecards in what was a short-notice matchup. However, during the fight itself, he couldn't help but shower praise on Iaquinta during the most inconsequential of moments. He later apologized publicly and stated that he had more or less got caught up in the action, giving props were due to Khabib as champion.
Sometimes having a live microphone in front of your face has the potential to do some very real damage, and while things could have been a lot worse in the occasion, we still have to include it. The year was 2017 and the United States were left stunned after gunmen opened fire at a music festival at Las Vegas, Nevada, killing 60 people in a truly tragic event. Naturally, the UFC wanted to pay tribute to those who had died or been injured, and during the next UFC event, they ran a video piece to commemorate the victims. The problem? Well, as this piece was running, someone forgot to turn off Joe Rogan's mic, and you can very clearly hear him asking if he had the time to run off for a piss in the middle of the video package. Sure, this wasn't Joe's fault at all, but we'd be willing to bet that he wasn't too thrilled to find out that his seemingly innocent request had been heard by millions of viewers. On another day, it would have been a lighthearted slip-up, but the timing was just awful.
Do I have enough time to take
The Fox debut. Getting a deal done with major broadcaster like Fox was a hell of an achievement for Dana White and the UFC. Naturally, they wanted to make a major splash with their debut on the network, so Dana brought together many of the most recognizable faces in the sport for a promotional press conference. Joe Rogan was of course tasked with giving each fighter's introduction, but in one of the most hilariously unfortunate moments you'll ever see, his delivery was totally messed up by a Fox team who were behind the camera. Chuck Liddell and Rashad Evans were introduced to the public with an issue, but everyone was left on the verge of an all-out laughter when Joe mixed up George St. Pierre and Frankie Edgar. Whether it was his own fault or the production crew's, the resulting sequence was just about as awkward as a moment as you can imagine. A silence quickly fell over the studio. Even GSP and Edgar were forced to crack a smile about the whole thing. Not a great start for UFC on Fox, but trust us, things eventually got a whole lot better.
And UFC welterweight champion George St. Pierre. Switch seats.
Look, we're just as surprised as everyone else when Jan Blachowicz managed to upset the odds in a major way and storm through the 205-pound division to win UFC gold. But we also reckon that one look at the dude would be enough to understand that he's among the bigger light heavyweights on the roster. So when Joe Rogan spoke to Jan about his massive victory over Israel Adesanya and started giving him props for how he managed to pack on the pounds as a former middleweight himself, we were all left scratching our heads. Blachowicz is certainly more likely to make a run at heavyweight than he does ever hitting the 185-pound mark. So when Joe started to praise him, Blachowicz was very clearly confused, but to his credit, he did a good job at letting Rogan down without making him look bad. Jan's unlikely late career resurgence had made a huge hit with the fans, but as UFC color commentator Joe really should have done his homework on this one.
Now, Jan, you had previously fought at middleweight earlier in your career, and you moved up to light heavyweight, but you put on size. Do you think...
I always fight in light heavyweight, all my life.
You've never fought middleweight?
No,
Okay.
never fighting.
My mistake.
Yeah.
Finally, we come to an incident that is shrouded in quite a bit of mystery, even today. Now, both Joe Rogan and Mark Coleman have written off this little altercation as nothing more than a friendly scuffle. It does look as though this brief scuffle got a little too heavy for its own good. Whether it was just some awkward posturing or something a bit deeper, the former UFC heavyweight champion Mark Coleman got a little too aggressive with Rogan as the pair met in a random corridor after a comedy show. What started as some playful grappling got strangely aggravated as both men continued to engage. Seriously, it was a pretty weird moment, and though it ended with Rogan and Coleman embracing, fans weren't totally convinced. Coleman himself said that when wrestlers give each other hugs, it often turns into something else. Instincts kicked in, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Deal done with major broadcaster like Fox was a hell of an achievement for Dana White and the UFC. Naturally, they wanted to make a major splash with their debut on the network, so Dana brought together many of the most recognizable faces in the sport for a promotional press conference. Joe Rogan was of course tasked with giving each fighter's introduction, but in one of the most hilariously unfortunate moments you'll ever see, his delivery was totally messed up by a Fox team who were behind the camera. Chuck Liddell and Rashad Evans were introduced to the public with an issue, but everyone was left on the verge of an all-out laughter when Joe mixed up George St. Pierre and Frankie Edgar. Whether it was his own fault or the production crew's, the resulting sequence was just about as awkward as a moment as you can imagine. A silence quickly fell over the studio. Even GSP and Edgar were forced to crack a smile about the whole thing. Not a great start for UFC on Fox, but trust us, things eventually got a whole lot better.
And UFC welterweight champion George St. Pierre. Switch seats.
An early setback. Teenage fight stories are rarely ones that adults are proud of, and when it comes to martial artists, stories like this are often the reason that they decide to train in the first place. Joe Rogan, as you might expect, is no exception. Long before he had secured black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in both gi and no gi, as well as Taekwondo, he was far less threatening of a teenager growing up like most other kids his age. During this time, he got into a fight, if you could even call it that, with a bigger teenager.
I had the last one I got in, I lost, and the guy didn't even hurt me. he got me in a headlock. Like, I didn't even know we were going to fight. I was like, why is this guy staring at me like this? Like, he got in my face. He grabbed me in a headlock, and he threw me to the ground. And he got on top of me in the bathroom, the boys' room. And he went like that. He was going to punch me, and then he laughed. He was like, nah, I don't even have to. And he just let me up. And it was humiliating. Yeah. It was humiliating.
This proved to be the last straw for Rogan, and from there onwards, his life was well and truly taken over by martial arts. Victor who? You only get one chance to make a first impression, and for Joe Rogan, his earliest days in the UFC saw him run into at least a few problems. In 1997, Rogan made his first appearance on the UFC broadcast team, filling the role of a post-fight interviewer. Appearing on that card was a future Hall of Famer Vitor Belfort, a man who, despite his young age, was already making some serious waves as heavyweight. At just 19 years old, Belfort was already seen as one of the most well-rounded fighters in the game, a dual threat of boxing and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu who was expected to take the fight game by storm over the coming years. So when Joe took to the octagon after Belfort's victory to give him his chance to speak to the world, he repeatedly called him Victor instead of Vitor. Which, although not the biggest mistake in the world, was something that Joe probably should have gotten right, because, you know, it was his first day and all.
Let's go up to Joe Rogan. Joe?
I'm here live with Victor. Congratulations, Victor. Unbelievable victory.